we go again, from one point to another. Here we meet again, inside one hand to the other. When tears fall and people cry out, you want to get away just for one day. And all these things going on in our world today, we can't stop it, cause we're just a little bit more weaker than we thought we were. But it's okay, it can be just
Octave Chanute was a father of flight that is overlooked. In the late 1800s, he financed the research for some of the first successful glider flight. The research was originally done in northwest Indiana. Their area was later to become part of what is now known as Gary, Indiana. After some success with glider design, he then financed seminars around the world sharing his research. This research was provided to anyone interested, including a couple of bicycle mechanics named Orville and Wilbur, famously known as the Wright brothers. Octave had come to America from France as a teenager to New Orleans. With his father, they moved to New York, and Octave went to work for the railroads. He worked from surveying to become a civil engineer later in life. As he worked his way, he saw the need for quality preservative for railroad ties. The best happened to come from France in those days, and so speaking both languages, he imported the products to treat the ties here in America. He was able to amass a comfortable fortune along the way and pass this along to his family. Let there be no mistake, though, his interest in flight and the funding he made available pushed flight forward.
Gary, Indiana was founded in 1906 by the United States Steel Corporation as the home for its new plant, Gary Works. The city was named after lawyer Elbert Henry Gary, who was the founding chairman of the United States Steel Corporation. Gary Land Company Building, also known as Gary's First Town Hall, was built in 1906. It was the first building in Gary. It functioned as a city hall, post office, school, and business building. This historic building still stands today. At that time, the total population was just 334 people. One of the first cities ever built from just sand and dirt would begin to build immediately. What is now Lake Station, Indiana, would become East Gary, Indiana in 1908. The Gary Evening Post later merged with the Gary Post-Tribune, and the Gary Trust and Savings Bank were both founded in 1909. Gary would become a city in 1909, and he, Thomas Knotts, was elected its first mayor. United Steel would be producing steel as well. By 1911, the city's population had risen to 16,802 people. Half the population was foreign-born, and less than 383 people were colored. Gary was the site of civil unrest on September 22, 1919. An industry-wide steel strike begun, and a riot broke out on Broadway, the main north-south street through downtown Gary, between striking steelworkers and strike breakers brought in from outside. 3 days later, Indiana Governor James P. Goodrich declared martial law. Shortly thereafter, over 4,000 troops under the command of Major General Leonard Wood arrived to restore order. Strike breakers were mainly Mexicans and Negroes. Company officials played on the racism of many white steelworkers by pointing out how well-fed and happy the black and Mexican workers seemed now that they had white jobs. The strike began to lose support among workers by December, and the National Committee officially called off the strike on January 8, 1920. By 1921, major construction was underway downtown. During this decade, many buildings were built. The Palace Theater and the Gary State Bank building notably. The city population also grew to 100,000. Segregation, discrimination, and political corruption ran rampant over the next 20 years. Republican R.O. Johnson held the distinction as the only man to be elected 3 separate times as mayor. Also, the only mayor to be indicted while in office and sentenced to federal prison, but later received a presidential pardon from Calvin Coolidge and win his 3rd and final term as mayor. Former Democratic Mayor Joseph E. Fentery was the first Gary election in which a majority of the voters in the all-black Midtown neighborhood voted for a Democrat rather than a Republican. In 1945, Fentery became enmeshed in a bitter controversy over racial integration of Frable High School. Backlash against his support for the school's pro-integration principle led him to withdraw his name from candidacy for re-election in 1947. Upon retirement, Fentery had a personal estate of over $3 million US, despite having made only $8,000 a year in salary. Roosevelt High School remains the first and only school built exclusively for the African American community in the city of Gary.
As I left a life touched by Hollywood, another twist of fate would come my way. I met Quentin P. Smith at the age of 94. As I learned of his life as a young man landing in Gary, Indiana, through its end, the progression was amazing. Quentin P. Smith did not yearn to fly like the rest of his colleagues. In fact, he once said, "I didn't give a tinker's damn if I ever left the ground." As history has recorded, he served his country during World War II as a Tuskegee Airman. Smith flew primary planes known as service aircraft. He served as a flight instructor for primaries at the Tuskegee Institute. Smith weighed 200 pounds and was too big for a P-40 or P-51. Instead, he was made a bombardier. But he was steadfast in his resolve to fairness. Since my short time with this man, I have met countless people who respected and admired this man among men. Whether it was the students in the Gary school system or anyone else he came into contact with, his presence was known. He constantly served his community by getting things done.
Peter Mandich is the first person in Gary's history elected to successive terms as mayor of the Steel City. During his time as mayor, Tri-City Plaza was built. Gilroy Stadium, named from a local citizen, John Jack Gilroy, was also built at that time. At the grand opening of Gilroy Stadium on September 1st, 1956, all 8 area high schools participated in the Football-A-Rama exhibition game.